The morning sky was a dull slate gray when I first arrived at the Hollow Pines office. The building stood apart from the other modern offices in the district, as though time itself had forgotten to touch it. Its brickwork was stained with years of rain and neglect, the windows slightly warped, and the tall black doors loomed with a heaviness that made my stomach tighten. I had been told it was once a psychiatric hospital before being converted into office space, though most people spoke of that fact only in passing, as if mentioning it too much might stir something best left undisturbed. Inside, the air was different. It was colder than outside, not the kind of cold that came from air conditioning, but a damp, creeping chill that seeped through the skin. The hall smelled faintly of antiseptic, though dulled by decades of dust and disuse. The walls were painted in a pale, almost sickly green, and in certain spots the paint bubbled and cracked like skin blistered from a burn. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward my assigned desk, and I noticed the building's strange silence. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed muted here. The main office space was a wide, open room lined with cubicles, but the layout felt wrong, as though it had been awkwardly fitted into a place that was never meant for desks and computers. High above, the ceiling was arched like an old chapel, with beams blackened by age. My desk sat near the far wall, beside a tall filing cabinet that rattled faintly when I passed it, though no one else seemed to notice. As the hours went on, I began to see things that didn't fit the setting. A faded outline of what looked like a bed frame marked the floor under my chair, as though something heavy had been bolted there long ago. There were scratches in the wall behind the cabinet, thin and jagged, climbing upward in desperate vertical streaks. Every so often, I would feel a slight vibration through the floor, not from the machinery or footsteps, but like the faint rumble of something moving far beneath the building. The restroom was the worst. The stalls were small, claustrophobic, and the tiles were the same shade of pale green as the hallways. One sink dripped steadily, the water tinged faintly brown as though rust had stained the pipes. The mirror, though clean, always seemed to reflect the room in a way that felt subtly wrong. I could never put my finger on what was different, but I learned to avoid looking directly into it. Later in the afternoon, the lights flickered for just a moment. When they steadied, the air felt heavier, pressing down like a weight on my shoulders. I heard faint shuffling from the far end of the room, beyond the last row of cubicles. At first, I thought it was a coworker, but when I stood to look, I saw no one. Still, I was certain something had moved, a shadow retreating just beyond sight. As the day crawled to a close, I noticed something odd about the office clock. The second hand seemed to stick now and then, pausing for a heartbeat too long before jumping forward, as though time itself hesitated inside these walls. The building groaned in the early evening, the sound like distant doors being forced open. I began packing my things quickly, feeling that if I lingered even a few minutes longer, I might not be able to leave at all. Walking out into the cool night air, I told myself it was only the strangeness of a new place, the mind playing tricks in an unfamiliar setting. But as I glanced back at the dark silhouette of the Hollow Pines office, I noticed something in one of the upper windows, a pale and moving face watching me, eyes dark and expressionless. The next morning, I would return, as all employees did. And though I would never speak of what I saw, the thought would remain lodged in my mind. Some of the old patients had never left. The building was old enough that its steel bones groaned when the wind leaned against it. It was a relic from another era, an angular, concrete monolith from the 1970s, with narrow windows like slits and a lobby whose faded marble was etched with the wear of decades. The elevator was the oldest thing of all. Its bronze doors were dulled to the color of tarnished coins, the panel inside scratched by years of impatient fingers. There was no button for the 13th floor. The numbers jumped from 12 to 14, as if superstition had erased the truth. Yet, in the maintenance logs stored in a dusty file room in the basement, the original blueprints showed a clear entry, level 13, service floor. Late in the evening, when the building was nearly empty, the elevator behaved differently. Its normal hum shifted into something slower, heavier, as though each floor it passed weighed it down. The fluorescent bulb inside flickered more often, and sometimes the ride between floors stretched on longer than physics should allow. No one could say for certain when it first started stopping there. Those who mentioned it did so in vague, nervous recollections, never certain if it had been a dream, or if their memory had been tampered with by the building itself. On that particular night, the air was heavy with rain, and the storm outside pressed against the glass like a dark sea. The elevator rose as it always did, humming with the faint clank of its cables. Somewhere between the 12th and 14th floor, it shuddered, slowed, and stopped. The doors slid open. The light inside the car spilled out into a hallway that was not supposed to exist. The air beyond was stale and motionless, thick with a smell of rust and damp carpet. The corridor stretched farther than it should have been possible within the building's frame. Its wallpaper was a pale yellow, water-stained and peeling in wide strips, revealing layers of older, darker paper beneath. The carpet was threadbare, a faded pattern of flowers long since dulled into the same brown-gray as dust. The silence was oppressive, the kind that seemed to thicken the air until it pressed into the ears. And yet there was a hum, faint and low, like an old refrigerator running somewhere far away. At the end of the corridor, the hallway seemed to narrow. The light grew dimmer there, pooling weakly against a single door that stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, the darkness was absolute, absorbing what little illumination reached it. At the end of the corridor, the hallway seemed to narrow. The light grew dimmer there, pooling weakly against a single door that stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, the darkness was absolute, absorbing what little illumination reached it. The elevator should have closed its doors and continued upward. Instead, it waited. The floor indicator above the doors glowed in an amber haze. 13. The number should not have existed. No one ever saw what lay past that half-open door. Some swore the hallway changed each time, shorter, longer, branching into impossible angles. Others claimed they had heard faint movement in the dark, the slow shuffle of something dragging its feet, or the creak of floorboards under a weight too heavy for a person. The elevator never left on its own. Once it arrived at the 13th floor, it waited until the passenger inside chose either to step out or to close the doors and flee upward. But those who stepped out were never seen in the building again. Their names would linger in the employee registry for months, then be removed without explanation, as if they had never existed. And yet, on some nights, when the storm is heavy and the air is thick with electricity, the elevator hums its slow, strained tune, and the doors open onto that yellowed corridor once more. The building never speaks of it, but the blueprints in the basement remain, quietly marking a place that was never meant to be found. The small apartment had always felt too quiet, as if it was holding its breath. On the day the tenant first moved in, the late summer air was thick and heavy, the kind of heat that made the shadows cling to the corners longer than they should. The hallway leading to the apartment was narrow and dimly lit, lined with old mailboxes that hadn't been painted in decades. On the welcome mat, there was a small, neatly wrapped parcel. It was the size of a shoebox, tied with a faded red ribbon. The wrapping paper was a pale yellow, brittle at the edges, patterned with roses that had long lost their color. There was no name, no card, only a faint, unfamiliar scent of dried earth and something faintly metallic. Inside the apartment, the air seemed colder, almost damp, though the windows were shut against the heat outside. The gift was placed on the kitchen counter, its presence oddly heavy in the room. The walls of the apartment were bare, but faint marks showed where pictures had once hung, rectangles of cleaner paint surrounded by a film of dust. In the bedroom, the floorboards creaked as if someone had stepped there recently, though the space was empty. The box was opened later that evening, under the pale light of a single overhead bulb. Inside was a withered bouquet of lilac, their petals curled and brittle, their stems wrapped in lace-stained brown with age. Beneath them, resting in the folds of yellow tissue paper, was a tarnished silver locket. Its chain was knotted and frayed, and inside the locket was a faded photograph of a woman, her eyes dark and unreadable, her expression caught between sorrow and something sharper. The back of the locket was engraved with a date 22 years in the past. That night, the apartment's quiet became oppressive. The walls seemed to hum faintly, a low vibration that could almost be mistaken for distant traffic, except it rose and fell irregularly, like breathing. The hallway light outside the door flickered, sometimes going out entirely for long stretches. By the third night, the scent from the box had deepened less like dried earth and more like something freshly disturbed from the ground. The lila had begun to crumble into dust, scattering across the counter without any breeze to move them. The locket, though untouched, now hung open as if someone had been examining it. Shadows in the apartment shifted where they shouldn't, pooling in corners, stretching across the floor as if pulled by unseen hands. In the mirror by the bathroom door, the reflection of the room sometimes lingered a moment too long after turning away, the woman from the photograph standing just at the edge of sight, her head tilted as if curious. The parcel's paper and ribbon were gone one morning, vanished without a trace. Only the locket remained, resting on the pillow as though it had been placed there in the night. The apartment never grew warmer after that, no matter the weather. The tenant learned to keep the locket in a drawer, though sometimes it returned to the kitchen counter or appeared by the front door, always slightly warm to the touch, as if it had just been held in someone's hand. And every so often, late at night, the faint sound of a knock came from the inside of the apartment door. 3 soft taps, patient and waiting.